We're in Congregation Beth Israel, the only synagogue here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And we originally, in 1958, were started in Biloxi. And then after Katrina, it was heavily damaged. We moved up here, and we were lucky to have this new synagogue here on Three Rivers Road. Shane Seacool, the Ocean Springs artist, built our ark just in time for our dedication, which was back in, I think that was May of '09, we dedicated this new synagogue. Jewish history goes much further back. I think most people would be really surprised at the depth and the breadth of Jewish history on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. The earliest documentation I can find is from the John Law settlement in 1720. When the ships arrived, they described the settlers as French, Germans, and Jews. It's right there in the log. And the leader, sort of the local manager of that settlement, was a man by the name of Elias Stulthaus, and he's described as a Jew from the Rhineland. Later, we see Jewish presence again. In 1853, we have a deed to a cemetery in Biloxi called Hebrew Rest. One of the local trustee was a man by the name of Samuel Friedlander from New Orleans that came over. He lived in the house that's now Mary Mahoney's. That was his home back in the early 1850s. He was a real estate developer of that day. But he was a trustee on the old cemetery. There's only one stone left there. Some of the stones have disappeared over the years. But the one stone that's left is from Michael Levy. And we found a lot of history about him. A young teenager, died of yellow fever, born in Paris, immigrated as a teenager to Biloxi. He must have had family here because it's a beautiful stone. It cost a lot of money, I'm sure. See these memorial boards over here? We've got his name up there. So on the anniversary of his death, we call it the yahrzeit, we'll light the light by his name, and we'll say a prayer honoring his memory. So that's our tradition of maintaining that memorial. We're kind of a satellite between New Orleans and Mobile. Rabbis would come over from New Orleans for burials or for other events. Maybe for weddings, and then also the rabbi from Mobile would come over from time to time. We've got records of Rabbi Alfred Moses from Mobile coming over during World War I to service the Navy soldiers at the Gulfport training facility. And that's the first documentation I can find of a Jewish service held in Biloxi. That was at the Elks Club. They apparently rented the ballroom upstairs. And the little article in the Herald said that he gave a sermon and to a packed house. Everybody was interested to hear what he had to say. He was quite an orator, apparently, around 1917, 1918. It wasn't enough of a size to have its own synagogue, its own rabbi. So it was kind of like what we are now, a small, struggling little community. We bring in a rabbi from Atlanta. We can't afford a full-time rabbi, but we have a visiting rabbi who comes in. And then for the high holidays, we bring in a cantor. And, we do the best we can. And we're pretty active for a little small congregation. Yeah. When we did the dedication here, we were fortunate. The mayor came out. And we recently had a Holocaust memorial ceremony. And the sheriff was here and read names. And so we try to publicize our events and invite the community to come. We often have for Friday evening services, we often have visitors, and we have University of Southern Mississippi students who are taking a diversity course, and they come here to experience what Jewish life is like. It's almost like you're swimming against a fallen tide. It's the secular, everything is more secular now, less traditional, so it's hard to, we struggle, but we do the best we can. The role of the mom and pop store. The storekeepers many times were Jewish. And Biloxi had a number of Jewish merchants. I looked up in the city directory from 1905, and there was a whole list of Levies that had stores on Howard Avenue. When I was growing up, there were a number of Jewish merchants in downtown Biloxi. There was the Saul Frank store, the Hirsches ran that, and the Rubensteins had the Keen's children's store, and Mr. and Ms. Friedman had Kent's men's store. But over time, retail has changed, the economy changed, big box stores have sort of taken over, so you don't have as many small Jewish merchants like you used to have. But they played a key role in developing the cities, the commerce of the region, and it wasn't just in commerce. I mean, we've had some Jewish Mardi Gras kings. We had Dave Rosenblum was the first Jewish king of Mardi Gras in Biloxi, call him Biloxi's King David. They're promising signs. The pendulum swings, and sometimes it seems like there's renewed interest in identifying with that history and that culture. Then other times, that growing movement away is discouraging. My dad used to tell about my grandmother would arrange for the kosher butcher in New Orleans to put her kosher meat on the bus, and the bus would drive it over, and she'd be waiting out on Highway 90 for the bus to come by to drop off her meat for her kosher Shabbos dinner. So people struggle with that, try to hang on to that tradition and maintain those traditions as best they can, even though we're kind of lost down here in South Mississippi, away from the mainstream of American Judaism. But we maintain our affiliation with United Synagogue, and they have been very supportive. They helped us rebuild our synagogue, and the regional director, who's officed in Florida, came for a visit and worked with our board. So we've gotten a lot of support from the national organizations, even though we're a tiny little community.